So today's webinar is the next in a series of webinars that we've had. And our guest speakers today are Andrew Tutt, Director of Sector Performance from the Office of Sport, Matthew Tregloan, the Director of Sports Governance and Organisational Enhancement from the Australian Sports Commission, and Ian Fulliger, who is a Principal at Lex Sportiva and a leading Australian sports lawyer. Okay, Andrew, I'm going to put you on Spotlight now and take myself off Spotlight and turn my camera off. And I will leave the beginning to you.
Thanks, Simon. And look, welcome everybody to what is our fourth information session about the organisation support program. So as you all know, some big changes happening with new government's election commitments to increase the funding. So we're running a number of information sessions. So this one today is about the sports governance standards. So look, before we start, I just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands and waters where everyone's meeting today. I'm at Sydney Olympic Park, so that is the land of the Wongal people. I want to pay my respects to elders past, present, and extend that to any Aboriginal people who are here today. So just a bit of a quick recap so people can see we've been going through the consultation on the new organisation support program. So that actually finished. We had our second SSO forum a couple of weeks ago. And you can see then that we've had a couple of other information sessions. So this is the last one today as well on the sport governance standards. You can see with some of the reporting timelines. So we've had milestone 1, which is now closed. We extended it for a couple of weeks, which is collecting information on how you collect information on membership and participation data. You can see there's been a number of self-assessments that we've asked people to do, which is milestone 2 due on the 3rd of May, which also part of milestone 2 is the sport governance standard, which is due by the 1st of June. And this is the topic of the webinar today. So, like Simon said, this is about the Australian Sports Commission Sport Governance Standards Survey for New South Wales SSO. So important to know for those of you who've been doing it for a while, this is replacing the annual SSO Organisational Health Survey that we've done for, I think, the last 5 years, had a break last year leading up to the sports governance standards survey. So it's through the game plan platform, and I think it will be available from the 5th of April. Our previous webinar was about game plan. So again, very exciting initiative, I think, for New South Wales and for state sporting organisations. And so clear that this is a requirement of funding under the organisation support program in 23-24 is that all SSOs will complete the sports governance standards survey by the 1st of June. I guess it's important, and as you'll hear, that it's not just a compliance piece for the new funding for OSP. I think what you'll hear from Matthew and Ian is what the benefits are for you as an SSO of actually doing this and where you can take this with some governance improvement plans. I guess the really exciting thing is that, you know, now all NSOs and all SSOs across the country will be doing this, which I think is a first. So that will be very exciting. Like Simon said, we really want to acknowledge we've got 2 great speakers in Matthew and Ian today. So Matthew's going to outline the process for the development of the sports governance principles and the standards, the survey process and experience of NSOs. So NSOs have been doing this already, as have a couple of other states. And Ian's going to provide an overview of the sport governance standards. I guess many SSOs will know Ian. I think you've worked with a lot, Ian. For people who've seen the extensive resources we've got on our website for running your state sporting organisation, Ian's probably behind the majority, if not all of those resources. So Ian's been a great source of advice for us, for people who've been in on the consultations and the feedback we've been doing about the new organisation support program. I guess we've been talking a lot about alignment with the Sport Commission and with NSOs. So again, Matthew's been a great lead and a great source of advice for us. So we're just going to be sending around the slides as well. So these are just a few links that we'll have in the slide about the sports governance standards, the principles, and like I said, we've got an extensive running your SSO resource section of our website. So we'll send the links around to those. And also again, Russell Grimson, who's the new manager of sector capability, is leading all of this work on the new OSP. So Russell is away today, but there's a contact for him, which will also circulate. So I think, Simon, that's it from me, and we'll pass over to Matthew. Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm just attempting to share my slides here, so if you can let me know when they come up, that would be good. While we're waiting for them, I can get started. So really appreciate the time for everyone setting aside some time for us to come and talk to you today about sports governance standards. I'll, as Andrew's spoken about, thanks for the thumbs up there, take you through the background to the standards, how they were formed, why they're a benefit to you, and then go through some of the details around how you complete them, the data that you get once you have done that, and how you can use that to support some continued governance improvement within your organisation, but also more broadly within your sport. And I'll touch very briefly on some of the information on planning and resources that we'll expand on at a later date, but that will be the next steps post the assessment. I'd just like to add my acknowledgement to Andrew's acknowledgement of country, and for me, the Ngunnawal people, the traditional owners of the people that I'm joining the meeting from today. So the background to the sports governance standards really starts with the sports governance principles. Some of you on this call today are likely to have been a part of this journey, but back in 2020, the ASC adopted a partnership approach with our state and territory colleagues, so the office in New South Wales and the equivalent across the entire country, to produce a co-designed framework to support sporting organisations at all levels and in all parts of the country to develop their governance. It was really important to do that with the sector and to come up with some principles that were really relevant for sporting organisations. So these are not principles that are aimed at ASX 100 companies, but through the co-design are brought together to provide practical guidance towards best practice for sporting organisations, and that's sporting organisations of all sizes and all levels. So from the largest NSO down to organisations at club and community level. And really the foundation point for that is the sports governance principles that were released in 2020 to provide, across those 9 principles that are on your screen there, some guidance around what good governance looks like within the sports sector. Now, they weren't necessarily broad because they're intended to cover that broad spectrum and size of sporting organisations. And so the way we bring them to life is through the sports governance standards, which is the topic for conversation today. The sports governance standards are the evaluation mechanism that really bring the principles to life. And they're targeted to help organisations to assess in a self-assessment way their governance maturity and to identify the opportunities for further improvement. As you can see on the screen there, the sports governance standards break down those 9 principles into 35 standards, so 35 question areas that then have 4 maturity levels attached to them, where you can self-assess which maturity level best applies to your organisation. Pardon me. Just had lunch before I've joined because I've been back to back, and so just a little frog in the throat. Apologies about that. And so this governance framework, I've just outlined the sports governance principles and the sports governance standards. They've been now in place across the sports sector, and in particular NSOs, for the last 4 years. So as Andrew has touched on, the sports governance standards have been used by all NSOs for 3 years. And a number of states and territories have also utilised them within that period. South Australia, Northern Territory, WA, Victoria primarily have used the standards within their SSOs over the course of the last few years. And those governance framework documents have also been, sorry about that, have also been picked up and promoted by the AICD as best practice. So into a few of the nuts and bolts around how the SGS self-assessment works. As you can see there, it's really capability focused, and Andrew touched on this. They're not a compliance exercise. They're not a pass-fail. They've been designed to help organisations to self-assess where they sit in terms of their current governance maturity against those standards, and are really used to then inform the improvement of those governance areas through tailored plans. So they're not a pass-fail. They're used as a baseline for improvement, not a test. And that's really important to consider as you complete the assessment yourselves, that this is not being used to grade sporting organisations or mark them down. It's really a tool for you to be able to, pardon me, identify the current governance maturity and be a springboard for further improvement. As I said, they're a self-assessment. So this is your own assessment of your organisation's maturity within each of those standards. And then the maturity scale, there are 4 components again each standard, and I'll show you some examples of this. And ultimately, when you're doing your self-assessment, you need to select the measure that best describes the maturity against that standard within your organisation. One of the guidance points to take away from this is that each measure has a number of components within that. If you don't satisfy all the components, choose the measure that is below it. Ultimately, that's the one that's going to give you the most accurate view of your governance maturity and help with that capability improvement focus. One of the key things that's been enabled by the national approach across the ASC and state and territory governments is the development of expected maturity through a national framework. And what this does is take into account organisational size, scale, and groups organisations based on their characteristics, not just their jurisdiction. What that does for you is then allows more useful benchmarking and comparison. So what you'll see, and I'll show you some reporting later on, is that within that expected maturity, you're then being able to compare yourselves and where you would ideally like to be against organisations that share the same characteristics as you across jurisdictions, as well as within your same sport across all jurisdictions, and not necessarily comparing. To take 2 examples that I saw in the chat earlier, Croquet New South Wales to Athletics New South Wales, you might be picking organisations that share some common characteristics across jurisdictions, and therefore a more useful comparison tool. That maturity level, that assessment, is then used as to develop a tailored plan for enhancement. And as you'll see when I show you some of the reporting that's available, this then enables you to identify relative to your own governance strengths where there is opportunity for further improvement. And then to help you make those improvements, Andrew has touched on the resources that are available within New South Wales and that Ian's helped to develop. In addition, there's a national governance resource library that provides some really practical guidance sheets, template documents, tools to help to implement those priority areas that are identified post the sports governance standards evaluation. So how do you do it? This is all completed through game plan. So, pardon me. I won't go into full detail around the game plan platform. I know that the team from the ASC is presented on, I think it was the 5th of March, and that recording is available. But there'll also be a suite of user guides that support how to actually complete the Sports Governance Standards assessment once it does launch on the 5th of April. And the period for completion will be from the 5th of April through until the 31st of May. I noted in Andrew's slide there that the reporting requirement finished on the 1st of June. So we might even look, Andrew, just to extend that out to the 1st of June to align with your periods here. It's a really simple process. So there's the link there on the screen to access game plan. Once you are registered, it's 3 simple clicks to start the SGS assessment, and that will be spelled out in the user guides that are circulated. For any technical support, there's the email on screen. Again, they'll be in your user guides. And for any queries around jurisdictional specific requirements or application, please refer those back to Russell and the team in the first instance. But anything that's related to accessing game plan or the SGS assessment through that platform, please refer through to us, and using that email there, happy to assist ASAP. Once you're then into the SGS, the way you get the most out of it, it is an example on the screen, shows the last 3 questions within the SGS self-assessment. We would recommend that you sit down with the offline SGS version, and Andrew's already provided a link to you, and that you work through it with your board, chair, governance committee as appropriate beforehand, to determine the response that best fits the current maturity in your organisation. One of the limitations in the game plan system is that the survey needs to be completed in one sitting, so the SGS self-assessment, so you won't have the opportunity to save it and come back later on. To mitigate that, but also to make sure that you've got the best and most complete assessment information, we'd suggest taking a copy of the SGS prior to sitting down to the game plan platform, and as I said, with the governance layers within your organisation, working through and assessing which is the most appropriate maturity point for you to select, mark that down, and then when you log on to the system, it would just be a matter of, for the equivalent standard, just selecting the one that you've pre-identified and then submitting it. Once you've done that, one of the real benefits for you is the data and reporting that will be available to you through the system. So here is an example of what it looks like at the moment. In the top left component there, you'll receive your average score by year. In the top right, you'll receive your average score by principal. And then probably the most useful one to inform your planning is the section at the bottom there, which is a bar graph that illustrates in the orange line the expected maturity. So again, that is tiered to your organisational size and characteristics. Your self-assessed score, so that's the dark green there, and then the maturity gap. So the gap that there might be between the expected maturity and what you currently selected, and that's shown in the light green. Again, this is not intended to highlight or to penalise any areas that are below the expected maturity level. It's really to identify areas where it might be best served prioritising time and effort using the resources available to improve governance practices. The example you see on the screen there is for the highest funded level of NSOs, and so you can see the expected maturity is at the top level for each of the standards. That won't be the case for smaller organisations, and for SSOs there is a more right-sized expected maturity level that's provided, and you'll see that through the reporting as you complete that. A note down the bottom there is worth touching on. There'll be comparison reporting available for you through the SGS that will provide the average score comparison within the SSOs within your sport. So again, Athletics New South Wales. Christian, you'll be able to see the average score of all of the SSOs within athletics and get a comparison point there, but also an average score within that organisational tier, so that grouping of organisations that share the same characteristics, and that way you'll be able to see against your peers within your sport and like-sized sports across, or organisations across the country, how you are performing, relative areas of strengths, and further improvement opportunity. Similarly, as demonstrated, I think, through the game plan presentation a couple of weeks ago, the governance questions that are asked of your clubs align to these SGS questions. And so what you'll be able to do through the reporting, it's all filterable, is to then look at how your clubs are performing against certain standards, identify trends, similarities, opportunities, and some areas within that where you may be able to take a leadership approach to address common challenges within clubs in your jurisdiction. And so the power of the data and reporting within game plan, both for comparison, but identifying some of those trends and opportunities is a really powerful one. We then, at a sector level, ASC and state and territory governments then take the collective information that is inputted by all organisations across the country. So again, this is all NSOs and all SSOs. And we produce a benchmarking report. Over the last 3 years, you've probably seen this. It's been a version of the benchmarking report based on NSO information only. We will, for the first time, given the uniform adoption of the sports governance standards, be able to produce a state of Australian governance benchmarking report, which will then be able to be used to, from a government point of view, help us to prioritise the resources and course development that where there is the greatest need across the sector, but also to get an understanding of the emerging challenges, trends, issues, and to be as useful with the things that we produce for the sector as we can be. That'll be an important step for us and something that we haven't previously been able to have a data set around how governance is in practice across the country and what the relevant maturity levels are. Just quickly touching on a couple of other things which are the next steps to the sports governance standards. Once you've completed the assessment, you're then able to produce a tailored governance plan within the game plan platform. I won't go into a lot of detail here because we'll provide some more information in the guidance sheets as to how to do this, but effectively what it does is enable you, based on your responses to the sports governance standards, those areas where you want to prioritise your effort, to adopt a tailored governance plan that has some standardised activities, all able to be edited, but basically intended to say if you're currently assessed yourself as a maturity level 2 in a particular standard and you want to get to a maturity level 3, here are some suggested activities within a plan that help you to do that over the course of a period. And again, each of those resources where they're referenced there are directly hyperlinked in the plan. So it's one plan for governance, a one-stop shop that should ideally enable you to produce tailored governance plans that address your greatest area of need as identified in your own SGS self-assessment. I referenced the resources they're linked to. Those are housed in the National Governance Resource Library. You've probably seen this, or hopefully you've seen this, which is a collection of best practice documents endorsed by the ASC in each state and territory government. It's fully searchable and has information across each of those areas you can see on your screen there. But as I said, also directly linked into the planning module that's housed within Game Plan for governance planning. And then finally, before I hand over to Ian to talk you through some of the sports governance standards, the key things to take away, I think, from here, understand why the SGS is going to be useful for you, and that is it's a supporting capability improvement. It's not a compliance exercise. Secondly, prepare well as much as you can. Use the standards, identify in advance where you think you are in terms of your maturity, and then when you undertake the assessment with within the game plan platform, be able to, pardon me, select the one that best fits. When you assess, do it with rigour. So there's no right or wrong. If you're between two maturity levels, choose the lower. That's going to be most useful for you. And really the driver here is around the pursuit of good governance and maintaining or establishing foundations for organisational success. There's no other driver. When you get the data from putting in your SGS self-assessment, you can use that to support your own tailored governance plans, but also drive some governance improvement within your sport, within your clubs. And finally, this is going to be most useful to you if you're engaging your board in it, both in the assessment, but then when you get the results and the planning. Governance is ultimately something in most cases that needs to be owned and driven by the board. So you're going to get the most out of it and the most support organisationally if you engage your board through the process.
Thanks, Matthew. We do have one question, but I think this question is probably more relevant for Andrew than yourself. You there, Andrew?
Yeah, Simon. So Matt, John's saying, is there if it's an SSO, so if it's a unitary model, do they need to do it again for the OSP at the state level? I imagine not. I think we just need to know, John, that that you've done it and that's relevant to the operation in New South Wales.
Yeah, just the once within an organisation per legal entity. Certainly not looking to duplicate any of that.
No, definitely not, John.
And John, if you want more clarification on that, you can send Jeff an email when he's back at work. He'll provide you with a bit more detail on that. Okay, I think we're over to Ian now.
Is that all looking all right now, Simon, or we got to...
I think we're looking good now. I've changed the spotlight, so I think we're ready to go for you now.
Afternoon, all. Thanks as always for the opportunity for the Office of Sport to be here, talk to you again today. So thanks to Andrew and Simon, and big thank you to Jeff in absentia, sadly, for all the preparation and going into today. And thanks also to Matt for that background on the standards. I mean, preparing for this, I was looking back and I remember working with Alan McKinnon at the Sports Commission in the 90s on this stuff, which ages me a lot, before we started preparing research papers in the early 2000s, which led to the earlier standards and which have led to these principles and standards now. The threshold for why we're here today is that this is a funding requirement that we have to complete the sports governance standards. It is a really useful tool, having worked through it with a number of NSOs, as Matt said, to improve our standards. From our Office of Sport perspective, all the resources that Andrew was speaking to earlier that we have in New South Wales available to us are all based on the standards. So they're all standards compliant and recognise the Commission's requirements for that. However, as you've all heard me say and bang on about many times, and this is taken from the Commission's documentation, sport is different. And I won't go through these, but we all know that we have unique structures, lots of tradition, lots of passion, and we have different purposes. And the thing I've always said in all these governance presentations you've heard me banging on about over the years is you need to apply these governance principles within the context of your sport. And I think I picked that up in Matt's final slide there in terms of tailored governance solutions. Absolutely agree with that. It has to be what fits your sport. And as Matt said in his opening, you know, we're not publicly listed companies or ASX companies. We're sporting organisations, and each sport, as we know, is different, has its own structures and traditions, has very passionate people. That's what makes it tick. And we often have different stakeholders. So the standards themselves, and you'll heard me talk about this before in the context of governance, good decision making to help the organisation achieve its purpose. We've got to have a set of rules. You all know I love rules. We've got the constitution and policies. The team, now that's going to vary from sport to sport. If we're a really small team, then the board will be the management as well, as opposed to a larger sport where we have a clear governance board and a clear administration with employed staff. And the culture is key. And I'm thinking that that's probably where, with all the integrity work that's been going on since Sport Integrity Australia was started, there's more of a focus on that now. As I said, we've been having in governance at an NSO level since the late 90s, so for 20 years probably. And my view is that governance at NSO level is generally very good. But now the integrity piece is following in terms of improving that culture. we are recording this. I better be careful, hadn't I, Andrew? So I mean, I don't think the soul of Australian sport is corrupt, as some people might say, and their integrity is being questioned at every turn. Obviously, there's things we need to improve on, but that culture is key, I think, to improve that, and it'll enhance all the three items above it. So these new principles, and when we first did the standards, I think in the 2011, 2012, they were probably good for me, not so much for others to read, very bit legalistic and very much focused on the corporate governance principles. And the redraft of these in the mid-2010s, 15, 16, was to make them more, as Matt said, more sport oriented. So you'll see the principles are all tied back to sports language. So our principle 1 is all about that values, culture and behaviour. And you will have seen, and you will have seen from the work we've done before with the Office of Sport, that we should be having codes of conduct. And these are the things you'll be ticking yourselves off against in terms of the survey. Codes of conduct for our not only our members and participants, but for our board, and in terms of our defined values and behaviours, and then demonstrating those values and behaviours. So walking and talking the talk. The team itself, this is the golden question for governance. How do you keep all the members happy all the time? That's impossible. But how do we as a board govern so that we keep as many of our members and stakeholders as happy as much of the time as possible? You would have heard me say many times, communication is key there. So boards should work together to govern collaborative and create alignments within all the stakeholders. So do we have a stakeholder engagement plan? Do we have regular meetings, whether it's a formal general meeting or just a stakeholder meeting? What member communications do we have? And how do we otherwise collaborate with our members and other stakeholders as a board is a key thing that we'll be asked to assess ourselves on. The game plan. What's our strategic plan? Again, sport across the country has been focusing on strategic planning for quite a long time now. It's been a key thing for the Office of Sport. So we need to maintain that strategic plan, make sure we have that strategic plan, and ensure it aligns with our NSO. And for our regional and clubs, make sure their strategic plan align with ours as an SSO. And we should be able to assess our performance against that strategic plan so we know what success will look like for us as a sport. So the board. So this is always a good one in terms of the board composition. Should be a diverse group of people who collectively provide those different perspectives and experience to facilitate more considered decision making. That's always in the context of the duties that the board owes to the membership and what is in the best interest of the membership and the sport. But in looking at what that board comprises, you need to have a skills matrix. So what skills does the board need to achieve its current strategic plan? What do we have in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, which are key measures today? What is our gender balance, which is also a key measure? Do we have director independence, which I largely think we do, certainly at state and national level. But as I said, in terms of that tailoring to your own organisation, clubland is harder because that director independence isn't as clear as it would be at a state or a national level, and the governance principles and governance lines at club level certainly get more blurred because the governors are also the managers and the deliverers of strategy, and they do generally other things within the organisation to make it tick. How are boards appointed? And then the elected versus appointed director piece, which I think has largely been accepted across NSO and SSO land. There's not many constitutions we're seeing anymore that don't have the ability to appoint directors, which has turned out to be very useful. So if I'm appointed to a cricket board, do I need to have an understanding of cricket? Helpful, but if I'm being appointed for my government lobbying skill set or my finance skill set or my legal skill set or communications, and that's the contribution I've made, well, that is a good appointment for an independent director. Our rules. So we need to have a clear document structure and duties and responsibilities between the members and the directors and management. That division of power is very key, and the old division of power has gone. No longer do the members set the policy and set the budget and do that sort of thing. We are now moved well past that, and you've heard me go on all about that many times. And all our template constitutions for the Office of Sport have a clear division of power between the board and the membership in terms of what the membership can do. Might be affected. So in terms of your survey, what sort of legal entity are we? Do we have director term limits? What requirements do we have around director eligibility? What do we have in terms of director induction? And do we have a board charter? And again, all our Office of Sport resources have a number of tools around that, including a board charter for you to have a look at and tailor to your organisation. So how does the board play? What's its playbook? Its effective processes and continual review of performance. And I still think this is where we probably fall down a bit most in sport. We're really good at post-season reviews and post-games or event reviews, but we probably don't review our performance of boards and committees as well as we could, generally because the boards and committees are exhausted by the time they've got to the end of the year or the end of the event, and let us take a big deep breath and look to get ready for the next season. However, we need to have that review. So we need our committees, our Finance, Audit and Risk Committee, which is both a check for a board, but also a protection for a board to have that additional review of the finances. Reviewing appointing our chair, how is the chair appointed? How are they evaluated in terms of their performance? And that applies against all directors. So you'll be asked in the survey around that. If we have a CEO, what are their eligibility requirements? Do we have clear issues around conflict of interest and how they're reported? That is largely dictated by the law now and the legislation. So there's no real excuses not to have a clear conflict of interest policy and register for your sporting organisation. Then how do we report our governance? Again, if we're a company, that is dictated a little bit by the Corporations Act, not so much for associations, but there's no reason why associations, given they account generally to corporation standards with proper audits, can't look at company annual reports and report to the membership around those issues in terms of governance. That's matters like how many board meetings the directors attend, were conflicts properly declared, is there a clear conflicts of register, is that available for inspection of the members? Again, these are issues you'll be asked in the survey. The defence. So we want to protect the organisation from harm. So this is our risk management. And that first point there, vulnerable persons and children, our working with children check and our safeguarding policies are key. We should be looking, and again, Office of Sport have had resources on this since the late 90s for sporting bodies to implement and apply risk management systems to be developed and implemented across the organisation. And we're very good at doing this, but it's something we can always improve. Integrity comes back to our original slide in terms of the game plan and that cultural piece. We have to have integrity. There's a bit of integrity fatigue going on at NSO world at the moment due to ongoing policy changes through Sport Integrity Australia. Sport Integrity Australia sets the National Integrity Framework for NSOs to adopt, and all of us as SSOs are bound by that framework, and we will be required to have captured that framework in our rules and policies. I expect that will be part of the survey to make sure that's properly captured, and that will manage our disciplinary and our complaints and grievance processes. So again, sorry, back to evaluation. How does the board evaluate itself? How often does it meet? People say, should I go on a board? I said, well, can you go to the meetings? Or they say, well, no, I just want to go on the board. Well, don't go on the board in that case. Is there a clear board meeting schedule over the course of the year? Is there a standard agenda? Is conflicts of interest and declaration of interest on that? Do we have clear minutes? Are there clear timelines and when those minutes come out? The financial delegations and non-financial delegations between to whether it's to a volunteer or a staff member in terms of what they can or can't do on behalf of the organisation, they need to be clear. If we have a CEO, how are they evaluated? What do we do about succession planning? Again, all these issues will be asked of you in the survey to assess yourselves against. This is the thrust. We want to have contemporary sports governance structures, and that's what these principles and standards, which have been, as I said in the opening, developed over 30 years, are aimed towards to make our sports more flexible and agile and all those great new buzzwords, but so they can deliver their sport. So we look, how do we respond to challenges of the changing environment? How are we sensitive to that environment? How are we cohesive with a strong sense of unity and creating a community for our sport? And how do we build constructive relationships both within and outside the sport? And we must be conservatively financed. So these are all common sense tools. And I think the standards are very common sense, and the drafting is simple. And I certainly encourage everyone to take on board what we need to do in terms of adopting those. Sorry, I'll just get rid of this now. Undertaking the survey process. I'm trying to unshare, Simon, but it's not letting me. There we go. So I'm happy to take any. Here we go. Good. Happy to take any questions or any discussions in our last 15 minutes. But I hope that was a neat summary. The principles are available on the Commission's website, and the standards. Please read into them. There is, as Matt said, there is reams and reams of good resources and materials, both at national and state level. But I think the Commission's compiled everything in that National Governance Resource Centre, so I encourage you to have a look at that. Happy to assist any sports with the process. It's a simple process. The survey is really good, and it's a really useful tool to get game plan rolled out to try and instill into state, regional and club levels what the Commission's been working with national bodies now for 20 odd years. So hopefully to the improvement of sport. So back to you, Simon and Andrew.
Yeah, thanks very much. Another excellent presentation. There's been a couple of comments in the chat, but they weren't really questions. So one of the comments from Neil was pointing out the fact that some of these sports organisations are quite small, basically run completely by volunteers. Some of the structures you described just weren't really applicable to him. There was another question from Brian, and I think that's something that we'll deal with internally, Andrew.
Yeah. Simon, the one from Ian about the board structure for smaller sports. Yep. Ian, do you mind maybe saying something about that, about governance in general? But then, Matt, I think that's probably a maturity question in the standards.
Andrew, and thanks for the question, Neil. I mean, you're absolutely right, and that was my opening thing, saying if we're a really small sport with just a volunteer, then these governance principles may be too much for you. But I have no doubt, and I'm sure Matt will know, because Matt's good because he came from sport into the Commission. So I think that's right, isn't it, mate? So he had a bit more of a background, which is good. But there will be things in these principles that you will be able to apply to improve your sporting body, regardless of its size. I will bet my bottom dollar that you can do that. And Simon and Andrew have known this because I've banged on about this. You know, if you take two things away from any presentation we do and apply it in your sport, it'll help. And that's, and not taking words out of Andrew's mouth, that's what we at Office of Sport want you to do, to take things that you can use. So yes, I agree. All this might be far too much for you to apply in a small sport, but there will be things you can do. And if you assess yourself and you come up with a bunch of, what's the lowest, Matt? It's 1, isn't it? 4's your highest, 1's your lowest. If you get a bunch of 1s, well, okay, so what? You just got to improve. There's things you can improve on. That's all we can say. So, you know, Andrew's not going to roll up with a big black truck outside your office because you've got a bunch of 1s.
Definitely.
Yeah, and to your point, Andrew, this is where the expected maturity levels come into. So we completely understand and have designed the system to capture organisations of all sizes. And so when you complete that, you'll see that that when you get your data and reporting, that there's the expected maturity should reflect the size, scale, capability of your organisation. So it won't be compared directly to things that aren't relevant for you. That goes also to the question that that was in the chat around if things don't apply. So Ted, your question, Leonie from Table Tennis. Within the sports governance standards, as it's rolled out to SSOs, this hasn't been available to NSOs, but as an example of making sure that it's right-sized for SSOs. For questions that, for example, deal with CEOs, CEO eligibility or CEO succession profile, succession planning, if you don't have a CEO in your organisation, as we know many SSOs don't, there'll be the ability for you to select NA, so not have to select the 1 to 4 scale. If it doesn't apply to you, you can simply select not applicable, and that will reflect within your scoring.
Thanks, Matt.
Simon, I just posted the link. Thanks, Phil, just to the hard copy SGS that Matt is talking about before you do the survey.
Yeah, I'll actually provide an updated version of that, Andrew. I think the one I'll just have to review it there with a couple of the updates to include, for example, where there is NA available. So I'll get that back out to you if it's not the current version this afternoon to circulate.
I'll just say to follow on from what Matt was saying. Matt chairs a governance group of the Sport Commission, all the states and territories, and we met, in fact, just before this one today. And there's a lot of good guidance about how to do this on game plan that we're going to provide before it opens on the 5th of April. So, but also, like Matt said, this is the first time for us. So any issues, just get on to Russell. We'll again circulate our contact details, but I think it will be a learning experience for us as we go through. So I think, yeah, that's important, is do some preparation before you jump into the filling in the survey. Oh, sorry. Thanks. Wrong link.
Okay. Does anyone attending have any other questions they want to pop in the chat box? It doesn't look like there are. So in closing, if there is something that comes up in the interim, you can send an email into the sector capability inbox. We'll respond to that. If there's something to think of after this meeting closes, for example, we're open to any of that, to respond to any of those questions that you think of late. On behalf of all of you, I just want to thank our 3 presenters today for their time, first of all, and for their expertise. I think from the comments I've seen in the chat box, everyone appreciated everything you had to say. Your presentations were clear and were really beneficial for the people who attended. So thank you very much. For everyone who did attend, thank you very much for giving up your time today. I know you're all very busy people. We tried to keep as much of the time as we could, so we are finishing a fraction earlier. I'm sure you're happy to hear that. And it means if you haven't had lunch yet, you can go off and get lunch a little bit sooner than you had planned to. So anything that any of the 3 presenters wish to add before we go?
Just thanks again for the opportunity.
Yeah, I just want to say some thanks to Ian and Matthew for doing this. It's really very helpful.
I agree. Excellent. Okay, and on that note, we will conclude the meeting, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks all. Take care.